Hello everyone, welcome to ChessVisor, your wise choice to improve your chess. Let's talk about this game played between Gukesh and Praggnanandhaa from WR Masters round number 2. With white pieces, Gukesh starts the move with e4. So opening wise, we have Italian opening, the Giocopiano variation, c3, knight f6, d3, consolidating the center and also opening the diagonal for the bishop. So d6, doing the same, and after b4 attacking the bishop simply drops back to b6, and now with the a4 Gukesh threatens to trap the bishop. So a5 stopping that idea, b5 advancing with b5 and also it kicking the knight to e7. So we have castles by Gukesh and then knight to g6. After knight b d2, white wants to put the knight on f1, and then from there it will either go to e3 or g3 depending upon the position. So here Pragg simply castles on the king side and we have bishop b3. So expecting the move pawn to d5, so it will not come with the tempo anymore on the bishop. So and also it vacates the square for the knights, and considering this, Pragg played pawn to c6. So knight comes to c4 attacking the bishop and the bishop drops to c7. If you are wondering why the bishop is not going to a7, it's because you may lose a couple of tempos while you play the bishop to a7. Let me put the bishop back to a7. In some cases, what will happen? Okay, let me show you this. Bishop a3, you are putting pressure on this, and now the bishop has to come back to b8, right? And from there, when you want to connect the rooks, you cannot connect the rooks immediately because again the bishop has to move to c7 square. And that is why, considering all of this, Pragg plays the move bishop c7 directly, and here bishop g5 pinning the knight, and immediately strikes in the center with the move pawn to d5. So here h6 is also a fine move, so to simply kick the bishop or to cushion the bishop. So here we have, after d5 we have bishop takes f6 and then queen takes f6. After e takes d5 we have bishop to g4. Pragg simply ignores the threat on the c6 square, and that square is actually attacked twice by the pawns. However, with bishop g4, Pragg wants to put pressure on the f3 knight. Already he is having the queen on f6, so if he can add one more attacker, that may create some problem on the king side. And also, as you can see, once this pawn moves, this bishop's eyes will be opening, and that will create another problem. So all of a sudden, black is trying to attack white immediately, like it's just 15th move of the game. And here Gukesh continued with the knight e3, attacking the bishop, and the bishop goes to h5. So he plays now d takes c6 and b takes c6, and after b takes c6, in this position, Pragg plays the move pawn to e4, just trying to open up the bishop's diagonal. And in this position, if you are considering something like knight to h4, you are actually right, because knight h4 can be played. Bishop to d5 to defend the knight further, and then queen f4, knight takes h4. And actually this is a positional sacrifice of the queen. So considering, say for example, after g3, queen f6 and rook f takes d1. So considering this activity of these pieces and also the number of pawns on board, I think white is doing fine. So in fact, I think white is slightly better in this position. But as a human, we cannot take this kind of decision. We need at least some kind of imbalance which would benefit clearly, but the computer likes that sacrifice. So e4, bishop's eyes is open now. D takes e4, knight h4 now, and now comes the move knight to d5. After knight to d5, Pragg plays queen h6, rook e1, and then bishop takes h2 check. So here actually you can simply take the bishop, as we saw earlier, the same variation, that positional queen sack. So bishop takes d1 and then rook a takes d1, that can be played actually. And in fact, this c6 pawn is a very big thorn in the black's camp, and you cannot touch that pawn immediately as the knight is ready to jump into the e7 square to 4q. So considering this, white is doing fine in this position. So going back in the game, he plays king f1 instead of taking the bishop. So here he plays rook a7, so covering e7 and now threatening to capture on c6. So Gukesh plays queen to d3, and then we have bishop takes f3. After g takes f3, we have queen takes c6. So after pawn to f4, I think now Pragg's attack is kind of neutralized, and there is no good coordination between his pieces. So after f4, again he played queen h6, and now he played pawn to f5. So instead of that, there is one interesting move, that is pawn to e5. It's very simple. Is that it is actually opens the diagonal for the queen, and also sometimes when the bishop goes to c2, you have this beautiful battery thing going on, and also it will help the knight to land on f6 with a support, so that you can ruin the pawn structure of black in case if you need later. So that is why e5 was a fantastic move to consider in this position. But in the game he played f5. After rook b7 threatening the bishop, and that's defended. Rook a b1, rook f b8 doubling on the b8 b file, and also now the bishop is attacked twice, so bishop drops back. So now as you can see that e5 move would help him to take advantage of this. Pragg played queen to g5 now, so rook takes b7 and then rook takes b7, and now comes the move pawn to e5. And now as you can see, now he is actually trying to open up this diagonal, and also he is threatening a lot of things actually. The only or the main issue in this position, actually there is this back rank issue is weak. So how do we take advantage of that? So that is the thing he is trying to do here. Here actually the right way to continue the position is to simply give the check with the queen, like queen g2, and then forcing the king to e2. After pawn to g6, let's say you push the pawn to f6 to cut off the king's escape square. Queen g4 check, and then pawn f3, and then you exchange the queens like this. Excuse me, in this position actually you should capture the queen, so that you can exchange the queens. In case if you are capturing the pawn with the knight, then knight e7 will win the game. Say for example knight takes pawn, and then it's made in 3 actually. So going back in this position in the game, instead of considering queen to g2, actually that was the only move to stay in the game. But Pragg played rook to b2, blundering the game. Now as you can see, the back rank, as I was mentioning, the back rank is completely weakened. But how do we take advantage of that? And now comes the brilliant move, that is knight e7 check, cutting off the queen's diagonal and trying to exploit the back rank. And if you either move the king to f8 or h8, doesn't matter, the queen is going to land on d8 to deliver the mate. To stop this idea, if you consider taking the knight, that's what actually happened in the game. But now comes the move pawn to f6. So now the queen is threatened, and not only that, e7 is covered by the pawn now, and also you are threatening mate on h7 and then h8. And considering this, actually Pragg resigned the game. Let's consider something like, okay, if you defend the back rank, okay, naturally if you defend the back rank, then the mate is unstoppable on h7 and then h8. So queen takes h7 check, king f8, and then queen h8 is a beautiful mate, or queen takes g7 is also a mate. So going back in this position, okay, if you take the pawn, what will happen if you take the pawn? If you take the pawn like this, then again queen to h7 check, and then king is forced to f8, and there is no escape square for the king, because your king is, the queen is sitting on e7 square, so queen h8 would be a mate. So that is why in this position, after f6, that one blunder costed Pragg this game, and I think now he lost 2 games in a row. He must bounce back in the 3rd round. Let's see what happens. And if you like this quick review of this game, please give it a thumbs up. And still, if you're not subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing to the channel and press the bell icon to get notified for the future videos. As usual, this is ChessVisor, your wise choice to improve your chess.